One of the many reasons I love playing Fallout New Vegas after all these years playing all sorts of games is that despite the newer, more polished, more intuitive, more player friendly, more entertaining, more everything games coming out, even within the Fallout series itself, is that I love that stiff, buggy, and sometimes frustrating nature of it. It's the same reason I love Old Oblivion, the old Deus Ex, the old Halo, the soon-to-be old Vampire the Masquerade, and all those cultural gems from the early 2000s. I believe only in retrospect that we see games from the past as outdated. Once we get a taste of what the present can do, the past becomes flawed. It's why it's so easy for us as people to be critical of things people did in the past. Everything seems to lack a certain quality of life that we've become accustomed to, a manner in which something must be said, a feeling something should carry an unspoken and uninformed perfection. For games, it's smooth frames, physics systems, intuitive UI, clear and clean audio, beautiful art that will most likely get injected by the majority of players after their second play session. Stuff we take for granted. For those of us who still love playing those old games, it's that lack of those characteristics, that dreaded nostalgia that forms the memory of the game that we played for the first time so long ago. We remember how we felt about it, and we fill in the gaps with belief that we don't need the things we've come to take for granted, things that in reality we've become wholly accustomed to. It's for that very reason things like mods are so highly valued. They help paint over the downsides of a game, and in some cases bring back the best parts from previous versions or titles. It's at this point I should forewarn anyone hoping for a review of Nightreign. That is unfortunately not the purpose of this essay, and I will not be reviewing any aspect of the game, but I will be discussing mechanics and aspects of the overall experience, so that might still be relevant for anyone who's looking to get an insight into the game. Elden Ring Nightreign, despite its name, is not a DLC for Elden Ring. The company that developed it, From Software, decided to try their hand at making a roguelike Souls-like. To those who are familiar with the wide variety of games that exist out there in the world, this does not seem like a winning combo. Combining the ever-iconic From Software challenging combat with the chaotic, reset-heavy nature of a roguelike, two philosophies that on paper should not play very well, seemed a very risky move for the Japanese company. And yet, that combo has worked in the past. Hades, Dead Cells, Returnal, Sifu. Elden Ring is a title that is held in grand reverence amongst casual and hardcore gamers alike. It's considered to be one of the most accessible Souls-like experiences currently on the market, and has invited swaths of new players to reach out to more difficult games, proverbially breaking open the floodgates and bringing a very large increase to the Souls-like player base. So to endanger that reverent title with something so risky and off-brand drew a lot of attention from a lot of people. Like the chicken and the egg, the original Souls-like game was not in fact a Souls-like. It was an action RPG and its name was Demon's Souls. Of all the games released by From Software, Demon's Souls is considered to be the proverbial giant's shoulders on which games like Nightreign stand. The game was not intended initially to be hard. Instead, a quote from the game director and designer Hidetaka Miyazaki declares, "The intention behind the high difficulty of the games I direct is to evoke a feeling of joy and accomplishment in the player when they overcome these challenges." Miyazaki did not intend to create a Souls-like. It seemed he intended to make a game that evokes the hard-fought feeling of accomplishment from the games of old, before the internet, before guides, before builds, before quality of life. The gameplay of Demon's Souls was stiff, slow, and sometimes frustrating. It offered a variety of weapons, but generally it wasn't how a weapon felt, but what it did that mattered. Stamina, something that wasn't normally an aspect of an RPG that was watched so diligently, was now a commodity. Every roll, every swing, run, every block, everything you did cost stamina. And if you were without stamina, you were going to get hit. And you were going to receive damage. A lot of damage. So weapons became less about how they felt to use and more about what they did with the little stamina that you had to spend. Could they swing wide? Could you swing quickly? Could they stun an enemy when you hit them? What was the stamina cost for each swing? Some weapons could be imbued with certain elements by using associated consumables. This gave them more or less damage against different enemy types. Along with this, when you did take damage, the only way to heal without using spells or weapon effects was by using consumables. The iconic Estus flask had not been introduced, so the player had to manage their healing very carefully, spending time finding the consumables they needed before continuing on the journey. Another uncommon aspect of the game was the lack of ability to jump. While Dark Souls' jump is nothing to be proud of, Demon Souls completely lacked the ability to jump whatsoever. Unfortunate, but such was the design. Along with this, you had a central nexus from which you could travel between the worlds of the game. You're not capable of going from one world to another without going back to the nexus. The worlds could also be affected by a system known as world tendency. It's a system for determining the number of effects within the game. Commenter whatever chill 2 on r/Demon Souls explains it as follows. The gist is that when you die in body form or kill an NPC, you lower world tendency. When you kill a boss, specific other enemies, or invading players, you raise world tendency. Getting higher world tendency, towards white, makes enemies generally easier and health items drop more, but you get less souls. Getting lower world tendency, towards black, makes enemies more difficult. Additional enemies spawn, but also drop more rare drops and upgrade materials, and reward more souls. At the extremes, pure white or pure black, special events also happen. These range from pathways opening, gaining access to different items, some NPCs giving you things, special enemy spawns, etc. Each world is tracked individually and has its own tendency state. Thank you, whatever of Chill 2, very informative. These are the foundational elements of Soulslike. Demon Souls, as we know it, was the first Souls-like game created, and thus it stands to reason that it should form the foundation of comparison. Dark Souls 1 was a more accessible game than Demon Souls. The variety of weapons for killing enemies was greater, and as before, weapons could be enchanted with different damage types to make them stronger or weaker against different enemies. The world was intricately connected, designed like an Ouroboros biting its tail. A loop of suffering and progression that revealed itself slowly. Shortcuts back to previously traversed areas meant you could approach the game in a different manner than you had in the previous playthrough, although not tremendously. And yet, despite this new sense of scale and interconnectedness, freedom was still a precious thing. There were options, yes, but only a few of them had ever felt truly viable. A strength build, a dex build, a faith build, you had your classes, but more often than not, they just kind of dictated which weapon you'd be miserable with for the first 5 hours. Grass, Crest Shield, and Lightning Uchigatana, my beloved. Then came Dark Souls 2, a game caught in the long shadow of its older brother. Widely considered to be the black sheep of the series, perhaps fairly, perhaps fucking not, it experimented in strange ways. It added adaptability, an agility-based stat that affected rolling and iframes. It also added new weapons and armor, allowing for greater playstyle variety, but just like with Dark Souls 1, it didn't really amount to much. It also introduced soul memory, which was an anti-level farming mechanic that punished players for grinding in areas by removing enemies that they had killed too often. It added unneeded limits to the world and is widely considered to be the worst addition to the game series. Dark Souls 2 pushed you forward despite the game still being very linear in nature. It felt like a game torn between legacy and reinvention. You had more build freedom technically, more spells, dual wielding, power sensing and all that, but the mechanical cost of that freedom was complex and punishing. The difficulty came off as cheap rather than challenging. It was a sandbox with jagged edges, a game that wanted to evolve but didn't know what it wanted to be. And yet, in its confused ambition, it laid the groundwork for what was to come next. It was still stiff, slow, and frustrating, but it was still what the hardcore fans wanted. More. Dark Souls 3 brought refinement. It polished what 2 had fumbled and what 1 had invented. Combat was faster, more aggressive, far more responsive. Magic was overhauled, weapon arts gave unique attacks to specific weapons, encouraging experimentation and rewarding success. The world was beautifully bleak. the lore deeper and more melancholic. You could feel the series closing in on itself, the dying breath of the Age of Fire, history and legacy woven into every item description. Here, freedom became more thematic. NPCs became more ingrained in the story. They offered greater involvement, moving between zones, following storylines, sometimes dying for no reasons, but in the best circumstances, getting involved in some of the biggest and most violent fights. The game is considered to be the best in the series because freedom was breaking through the seam of challenging gameplay. Warping between bonfires was available immediately. The gameplay remained linear, but the levels became more open. Paths, secrets flowed outward into a world that felt like it had the space to facilitate them. It was the beginning of something great, but behind it loomed something even greater. Behind it came change. And then Bloodborne proved we knew nothing. A fever dream masquerading as a Souls game. From Software took the bones of Dark Souls and decided they no longer wanted the old knight in a dying world, lighting fires to restart existence. Gone were the shields, the slow sword and board battles. Instead, aggression was the new currency. Health could be clawed back by striking back quickly. Enemies lunged with frenzied unpredictability, and guns became the tool of the Souls-like player, now christened the Souls-born player. The world of Gehrman was more linear than Lord's Ruin, but denser, tighter. The player was now a flash of blurred tailcoats, spewing blood and these rapid dashes. The iconic rolling dodge was replaced with a quick dash and sidestep. Bosses were swirling, undulating dances of meat and gore, flying back and forth, high and low. The freedom Bloodborne offered was less about branching paths and more about playstyle with a narrower set of tools. No true magic builds, no heavy armor, you fought fast or you died. And yet there was liberation in that speed, a freedom that came from, not from choice, but from being forced to abandon caution. Bloodborne didn't ask you to adapt, it demanded it. Sekiro wasn't a Souls game. Not really. No classes, builds, online invasions, or fashion Souls. You didn't get to choose your experience. You were Sekiro, one-armed wolf. But in losing that RPG flexibility, From Software gave us something new. Freedom of movement. Grappling hooks, wall jumps, aerial kills, the game invited verticality. You could now crouch down and hide in plain sight, sneaking your way up buildings or even through tall grass behind boxes. It gave stealth and speed in a way that none of its predecessors could even have hinted at. Combat was tight, rhythmic, and unforgiving. It was less about stamina and more about posture. You avoided dodging when you could, now parrying every strike, building posture on your enemy until their stance faltered. You were on the defensive at all times until the very moment you weren't, and then you struck. You didn't manage resources so much as you managed pressure. It was this display of fundamental skill. For many fans, it was too different, too focused, too narrow. Dark Souls was just barely an RPG. Sekiro was something else entirely. It was an omen of the future. What Sekiro proved is that From Software understood something deeper about the genre they helped to define. Soulslikes were never just about stats, or inventory, or world design. They were about overcoming. Sekiro didn't remove challenge, it redefined the method. It was a bold declaration: we can evolve. We don't need to be shackled to our own formula, but despite this, many fans still called for a return to form. So, From Software once again spun the wheel of advancement, and what emerged was a titan by the name of Elden Ring. Elden Ring was an open-world Souls-like game. Players from Dark Souls who longed for the linear levels met a breath of fresh air with a land so open and on offer that every cave, dungeon and crypt felt like a microcosm of Dark Souls. Sekiro players who mourned the loss of a semi-open world were blinded by the reality of a true open world experience. All avenues were open, all opportunities on display. A genre that thrived on tightly controlled tension was now flung into a wild unknown existence, and yet it worked. better than anyone expected, because the world was open, challenges were not diluted. Bosses still hit like trucks, dungeons still housed ambush, traps, and grotesque monstrosities waiting to ruin your day, but you still had options. You could go somewhere else, level up, come back, ride past a threat entirely. You could shape your journey. Freedom of choice wasn't just encouraged, it was essential. A variety of builds, weapons, spells, ashes of war, summons, it was staggering. Every player's journey through the lands between felt unique. Elden Ring managed to do what so many games had failed to do before: scale complexity without sacrificing intent. But with this came a creeping question. Was it becoming too much? Too many choices, too many systems, too much openness. The tension that defined Dark Souls, the desperate scramble through a linear gauntlet, was replaced by sprawling maps, floating icons, and a mounting sense of optionality. Were Souls-like games easy now? Players were given a map of the world. It was limited, but still many things could be seen. Progress could, in a vague manner, be tracked. Points of interest seen from above. NPCs physically appearing as icons planted openly across the land. Torrent, a horse companion, could be called upon to speed up or travel across the world, and in the most fascinating of twists, could be used within select boss fights. Weapons touted these unique movesets, new special skills and moves that could be transferred between them through the Ash of War system. New elements that caused strange effects on enemies, respecking of characters made easier but still limited, hundreds of new items, hundreds of new enemies, a jump button, forgiving fall damage, voluntary PvP invasions, more easily accessible upgrade materials. Freedom was achieved at the highest level conceivable for Souls-likes without adding a difficulty slider. Elden Ring stepped far beyond the progress of Sekiro and Bloodborne. Had it done anything new for the games at large? Not really. Many of the mechanics and aspects that seem so new to Souls-like have been used for generations of games. But for Souls-likes, it was a renaissance. And now we arrive at Elden Ring Nightreign. It was not a DLC, nor an expansion, but a full game, a roguelike entry into the Souls-like genre. You had runs that matched Elden Ring's tough encounters, but they ended twice as quick. The proverbial walk of shame back to the boss was gone. The game was the walk of shame. No matter how close you got, no matter how much you worked, no matter what quality of build, if you lost, you died. That was it. Run over, time wasted. On paper, it sounded like heresy. The Souls-like is built on intent. Hand-placed enemies, meticulously designed areas, traps that punish greed, and shortcuts that reward curiosity. How does that coexist with the very randomness and speed that defines a roguelike? The purpose of a Souls-like game is to learn through repetition, to trial and error your way to success. What happens when the moment of learning is set too far into the game that you cannot simply get back on the horse and try one more time? There is waiting, there is time, there are new fights to fight, new weapons to gather, new teammates to match with. There is no build crafting like the previous From Software titles. There's only your individual experience. If you are successful in one fight, the next one is all that matters. The freedom of choice that each subsequent From Software title had offered was now left to randomness. There are means to obtain certain types of weapons, but specific damage types, specific spells, talismans, items, identity. With Nightreign, it's all to chance. Almost in like a monkey's paw manner, players have been given absolute freedom, at the loss of absolute control. So new questions emerge. Is Nightreign still Souls-like? Or is it just a hard roguelike? Better yet, is Nightreign really fun? Or is it just emulating Elden Ring? Is it good because it is a good game, or is it good because it is the next evolution of the Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring pipeline? Nightreign doesn't try to recreate Dark Souls in a roguelike shell. It lets go of careful map design and instead doubles down on mechanics. Combat is as punishing and precise as ever. The enemies are brutal when under attack. The stakes are high. The Battle Royale-esque wall closes in at all times. There is no taking a fight slow. There's quick judgment calls, non-stop rushing, and uncharacteristic skipping of enemies. The tension that comes not from the level ahead, but from the roll of the dice, the build you're given, the blessings you find, the compromises you take. It's paradoxical. The purest distillation of the From Software Souls-like approach to sequels. Take what was before and bring it to the now. Characters now carry mechanical functionalities from previous titles. Each one is a facsimile of a previous title or embodiment of something within the series. The Duchess dashes and flips like a Bloodborne character, flicking her wrists as if wielding trick weapons. Executor parries and blocks like the one-armed Sekiro, building poise on enemies before striking this wide slash through the enemy's guard. Wilder, Guardian, Recluse, Revenant, Raider are the bread and butter builds that developed across the titles. Greatsword wielders, shield pokers, the magic spammers, glass cannon faith users, and colossal weapon wielding cavemen. Nightreign, in a very literal sense, is the melding of the From Software legacy into a single game. And yet so many players are torn between the high highs and the low lows, frustrating team deaths on the verge of victory, and glorious moments of fighting against once impossible to defeat bosses. Nightreign is like staring into the legacy in From Software. When you play Nightreign, you can't help but see the ghosts of what came before. Elden Ring introduced so many new players to Souls-like games, so now when something appears in the game, hordes of players snap their fingers and point like an excited teenager going to a superhero movie. Everything becomes familiar because in some ways everything is ethereal. It's a house made from historic ruins. Try as you might, you cannot make something new from something old. The ship of Theseus was never not the ship of Theseus. Nightreign is the ship's. Its boards creak with remember whens and oh used to's. Look at the name. Elden Ring Nightreign. Some might say that it just uses that name because it shares the lore with Elden Ring, but the reality is even without the lore, it would still be Elden Ring Nightreign. Maybe that's what escaping the shadow of the Souls-like really means. Not abandoning its legacy, but reframing it. Nightreign isn't an evolution, it's a mutation. An offshoot in a genre often too caught looking backward and wanting for more of that. Embracing the chaos, the habits, natural evolution of players, the upending of expected behaviours, it might just be the best Souls-like game in years. And yet, after 3,433 of these words, I'm still unsure if I love Nightreign. I've loved almost all From Software games, ever since they're shown to me. And I can't help be that finger-snapping teen. I might just be prisoner to the evolution of Souls-like. But you know what? There's a reason I like playing Fallout New Vegas. There's a reason I like playing Elden Ring Nightreign. A quote from game director and designer Hidetaki fucking. The worlds could also be affected by a system known as cock and ball torture. Denser, tighter. Your player was now a flash of blurred Tate Cole's Tate